Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What Really Matters in NYC with your host, Tony Keevan, and of course, more importantly, you. We're just starting the show right off the bat here. Our topic is a Venezuela update. The topic is, who is Leopoldo Lopez and why does Presidente Maduro want him out of sight? And Venezuela is a very interesting topic. We're going to talk to a guest activist who's Skyping into us. This is a live show, ladies and gentlemen, so if you've got a cogent question, you can more than welcome to call in 212-757-1541. We have our commentator Lorraine on the line. Commentator Lorraine, are you there?
Uh-huh.
How are you doing?
Great.
Great. So, our guest, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, Venezuela's been a lot in the news lately, ladies and gentlemen, and of course we have a large Hispanic population here in New York City, and everyone's interested in South America, and Venezuela sort of leads the political turmoil edge of that. And so let's start with our guest, just ask some basic questions. This gentleman, you have intimate knowledge of Venezuela?
Yes, for the most part.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Could you give us a little bit of background on where is Venezuela exactly?
Venezuela is in South America, the north part of South America, and it borders Colombia, Brazil, Guyana, and the Caribbean islands. Aruba, Curacao, Bonaire, they're on the Caribbean side of Venezuela's coast.
And does it have is it resource rich?
Yes, it's one of the richest countries in the world in terms of oil. They have a lot of resources, they have a lot of gas, they have a lot of gold mines and so forth.
Got it. So, so let me ask you, who was President Chavez? Because everyone kind of hears that name, and that's not the current president, but who was he?
Chavez was in the military. For most of his young adult life, and he eventually stepped up the ladder and moved up in the ranks of the military. In the late 90s and late 80s and early 90s, he tried to do to remove the government by force with the military. He tried a coup d'etat, which failed, and he was put in jail, but he was never tried, and he was never sentenced, and he was eventually pardoned by President Rafael Caldera in the late 90s, and that at that point, Venezuelan poor was very discontent with, the way the government was running and the affairs of the state, let's say. And even though there were not the shortages that the country has nowadays, but nonetheless, the poor were very upset about it. And not just the poor, the middle class, and a lot of people in the upper classes were really upset with the government. And a lot of these groups, a majority of this group, supported the Chavez election, which he won in 1998. He was elected president of Venezuela, and yes, so that's a little background about him.
So let me ask you about Mr. Chavez, because he's very famous for a socialist way of democracy, he called it. Can you talk like a minute on that before we go into the current president?
There is not one socialist government that has worked. I mean, name me one country, and I cannot really think one. All the socialist countries, they have corruption, they have shortages. I mean, it's whatever he wanted to implement, it failed.
Okay, perfect. So let's take it to the president. So he passed away, and through some process, a new president happened, President Maduro. Could you talk a little bit about this man, President Maduro?
To talk about him, you have to step back a little bit and actually talk about Chavez a little more, because Chavez did so much. He reformed the Constitution. It was heavily amended. There were a lot of elections between 1998 and 2012. I believe it was the last election where he participated. And some of the elections, the last elections, were definitely not played fair. But nonetheless, when Chavez died, he pretty much said on TV that, if I die, you have to vote for Maduro. So he crown. He was the crown prince of Venezuela. But when he died, when Chavez died, the president of the National Assembly, under the Constitution of Venezuela, he was supposed to take control of the country until elections. And it wasn't done. Maduro took reins right after Chavez died without an election. He just took over the country. He was, by the National Assembly, he was elected president until further elections, which took 3 months. Elections, I think, happened 3 months after Chavez was dead. So it's amazing how a country and their National Assembly, their Congress, they all walked over their constitution. So here we have an illegal president to begin with. At that point, you had elections that the opposition, 3 months after Chavez died, the opposition was contesting the elections because they claimed they were dead people were voting. A lot of people had like 10 identity cards and were casting votes right and left. I mean, it was a lot of discredibility. And the opposition refused to acknowledge that at some point, and they requested a manual count of votes, which the government of Maduro did not comply. And they claimed that Maduro won by over, I believe it was 150,000 votes or 200,000 plus votes. I don't know the precise number. But quote unquote, they claim that he was elected. So, and that's what you have now. And ever since that election, which has not, I think it happens about 2 years, a little bit over 2 years ago, the country has gone from bad to worse.
Talk a little bit about the bad to worse briefly before we talk about Leopoldo Lopez. Tell us what sort of happened in the country between, end of Chavez and up till now with Mr. Maduro, President Maduro.
And Chavez was a very lucky president. He served a way of about 10 years of huge oil revenues. When Chavez died, within a year, I believe, oil started to crumble. The prices started to come down drastically. 95% of Venezuela's income comes from oil. Venezuela doesn't produce anything. They don't export anything but oil. And they import everything. Most of the 90%, if not more, of goods in Venezuela are all imported. So when the country was having all this account deficits in oil, they start issuing more bonds and going to China for loans, to the point that the oil continued to go down and down and down, and the shortage is becoming more acute. I mean, if you go to a supermarket, you have to spend at least 6 hours just to go and do your regular shopping. You have to go. Everything is like by the date of your identity card, the last digit. If your identity card ends in a number 8, for example, that could be a Friday, and that's the only day in the week that you can go shop for your goods. And the queues are blocks and blocks and blocks long. That's just one thing that happened during Maduro. During Chavez regime, during all the years that he was in the president, even though the few elections that he won, they were alleged to be also fraudulent, but it would never contest it. That was not an issue. People could go to a supermarket, everything was available. So that's something that happened during Maduro's reign. Another thing that happened through Maduro, it's the Bolivar. The Bolivar has lost all its value. The Bolivar is worthless.
Is that the currency of Venezuela, the Bolivar?
The currency of Venezuela. The Bolivar is worthless. I mean, last time I was in Venezuela, it was 2 years ago, almost. And I was having my connecting flight in Colombia because a lot of airlines, which is another problem. But going back to my trip, I was in Colombia getting a connection to Caracas, and I was trying to buy some bolivares, and they sold them to me on my way back to the States, which had a layover in Bogota again. I had some bolivares left over, and the currency house in the airport, they just refused to exchange them. They were like, no, we only sell, but we don't buy them. Yeah. So here I am 2 years later with a bunch of bolivares that are worthless. I mean, when I was in Venezuela last time, the official rate I believe hasn't increased, but the black market rate was 60 to 1, 60 bolivares to $1. Fast forward almost 2 years, not quite, the exchange rate has gone to 700 to 1.
Wow. Okay.
So that can tell you alone, I mean, the desperation and you know.
The situation, sure. So let me take you to the present, or you take us to the present, okay? Because Venezuela was in the news last week, and there was a lot of international outcry because of a sentencing of Leopoldo Lopez. Can you tell us who he is and a little bit about that?
Yes, Leopoldo Lopez, he was a politician. His family has been in politics for decades. He's related to the first president of Venezuela. He's even related to Simón Bolívar, who was the Libertador of South America, like George Washington here in the U.S. But putting all that aside, Leopoldo was the mayor of Chacao in the 2000, I believe it was 2008, 2007. He was the mayor of Chacao. Which Chacao, it's a wealthy suburb in Caracas. So he had issues with Chavez back then, and he was removed from his mayor. He was elected, and Chavez removed him. He didn't like him. He just had him removed. So he became it became very personal. A lot of these politicians it has become personal, the way they've been treated so unfairly. So he decided to start his own political party. So he did, and you know, he tried to go to be a nominee for the opposition, and he lost to Capriles. And he respected that, and Capriles went on to run against Chavez, and Capriles lost against Chavez, which it was alleged to be fraudulent as well. But nonetheless, Lopez comes from a political background, and he has always called for peaceful demonstrations, just like they do here. You know, when you go to Wall Street, they have peaceful demonstrations. I mean, some got out of control, but you know, you cannot control people. You can say, look, we're gonna march in peace, but what other people do, their behavior, you cannot have other people responsible for someone else's behavior. And that's what the whole trial was about. But anyway, so Leopoldo called for peaceful demonstrations back in February last year, and as a consequence of that, there were riots. There were people died. 43 people died from both sides, opposition and supporters of the government, and they held him responsible for those deaths, for damage of public buildings. And you know, he was ordered to surrender, and he did. And they had a trial. The trial started it. It took over a year and a half for this trial to eventually unfold last week, and it was a disgrace of a judicial system, of a democratic government, quote unquote, which is not. And it was a complete joke, beginning to end.
Tell us why. Give us examples. I heard the number of witnesses, etc.
to begin to go back to before even the trial concluded, right in probably in the middle of the trial, Leopoldo is such a strong character, and the government is terrorized of him. They really are scared of him. Even Maduro wanted to exchange him for a prisoner that is here in the U.S. So I release Leopoldo, and you release this guy, and we can exchange prisoners. That's what he proposed. So that right then and there tells you that Leopoldo from the beginning was a prisoner of the regime. This happened during the trial. I mean, this happened over maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago, that Maduro said this on national TV. That's how black and white things are with this guy. So anyway, fast forward to the trial. It was a mockery of justice, to be honest with you. I mean, here we have a judge who's 34 years old, who has very little experience, who replaced another judge in 2010. In 2010, when Chavez was alive, there was this judge called Maria Lourdes Afiuni. And this judge was in charge of this case that involved, I'm trying to remind my, what was the case about? Oh, yes, it was this businessman.
Oh, yeah,
He was charged for corruption and a bunch of other crimes. And it came out to sentencing him, and it appears that she did not have, I never read the case, but for what I read on the news and all over the UN and the European Parliament, it's that she didn't have enough proof to sentence this guy. Nonetheless, she let him go on bail because he was already arrested for a while. She couldn't held the guy any longer. So she had to let him go on bail for him not to leave the country until they regroup again and find enough proof for her to sentence him. Chavez was outraged because he was always opposed to Chavez, this man that he wanted her to sentence him without enough proof. So the guy fled the country because he probably figured out they're going to make whatever proof they need to sentence me. So he fled. And as a consequence of that, Chavez was outraged. He removed this judge from her position. She was put in jail for treason and for not following protocol of the judicial system in Venezuela. And this judge she alleged to have been raped multiple times when she was in custody. She was, I believe she was in jail for about 3 years to 4 years. And she was finally let go, I believe it was in 2003. She was granted parole. And now that she's trying to open up her case because she's not allowed to talk about it, she's not allowed to leave the country. She wants to bring a human rights lawsuit against the government and what they did to her. So anyway, the judge who presided over Leopoldo Lopez was sitting on the same bench this judge that I've been saying used to have. So they removed one judge because she didn't sentence someone, and they put this woman who was probably 29, 30 years old at that time to replace her. This judge, her name is Sabrina Barreros. She is a scum of the earth. It's so disgusting. How can someone, first of all, she granted freedom to the brother of the former Ministry of Power, Jesse Chacon, who has been accused of committing credit fraud and using public funds, and she let him go because he was the brother of someone in the high up in the regime, and she was in charge of presiding over that case. So she let him go. She did the favor to the regime, and she probably was compensated somehow. And all of a sudden, she ended up presiding over Leopoldo's case as well.
Okay, so we have like 4 minutes left. So I really want to. So tell us what happened. So you've taken us so beautifully to this point, and then what happened this last week? What did this judge who replaced the other judge? What did she do? What happened?
Well, she sentenced Leopoldo to 19 years, 9 months, 7 days, and 12 hours at a military prison for public incitement of violence. That's pretty much it. As of today, the decision has not been. Hello?
Yeah, we're there. Keep going.
As of today, she has 10 days to render her decision, and it has not yet. But Leopoldo knew he was going to be sentenced. When he was there last week in front of her, he told her, if the sentence condemns me, you will be more fearful to read it than it will be to hear it, because you know that I am innocent.
Wow.
That's what he told the judge before she read the sentence. This judge, she is hiding under rocks. It's been said that she was going to be sent to Chile after she condemned him to be the Venezuelan consul in Chile. Right after, the next day, she was like on her way with a diplomatic passport to Chile. Chile has refused to allow her in the country. They have the Chilean congressmen have opposed heavily of this woman. I mean, she had a price, and I don't know which country is going to take her at this point.
So let me ask you, because we have to wrap this up. It's been a fascinating interview. So Maduro's got the opposition lead now in jail for 13, 19, 20 years, however long it is. And are elections coming up? Do you see, because the country is spiraling out of control, they've lost all this revenue. There's talk of war with Colombia.
It's downhill. I mean, they have no money. They're broke, issuing bonds. They have no money to pay for goods. There are scarcity everywhere. They have issues with Colombia right now. They have a bunch of border crossings closed. They're fighting. Right now they're having issues with on the east side of Venezuela, Guayana. They're having issues with that country as well, because Guayana is claiming areas that are rich in oil and gold, and they're also having an issue. So the only thing right now that is like not involved with Venezuela at this point is Brazil in the south. But countries to the east and west, they have issues with Venezuela.
So when are the elections, and is there a hope for that?
They're having an election. It's for I believe it's for like senators or Congress, for the Congress, the National Assembly. I believe it's an election coming up in December 6th, and the opposition, they think they're going to win, but you never know, because the elections have been controlled from Cuba for the past 10 years. All the elections that have been going on in Venezuela are controlled from Havana, Cuba. The Castros are controlled in Venezuela.
So if you had a message to give to Venezuelans who are going to go to the polls and vote in this upcoming election, what would it be? What would you ask them to think about? Because I know you're concerned.
I think everybody has to. A lot of people that supported the government have already opened up their eyes, and they're not going to continue doing it. But without international oversight and manual votes, like not machine votes, because that's the problem. Those can be altered. They can have programs. They can have viruses. They can shut phone lines just to alter the outcome of an election. It's a problem. You need to have paper ballot, by hand, manual votes, and heavily oversight in every poll station.
So you would urge the Venezuelans to ask for that then?
Well, they have to, and they had already done so. And
Okay.
the regime has refused, and they said that no, there's no need for oversight.
Okay. All right, well, we can hope for the best. Lorraine, you have any questions for our guest? I know we've sort of taken the half hour fully here.
Well, I think it's always been a corrupt government there, and there are dangers for any country to have a one-product economy. But I'm just thinking maybe it's time for maybe someone to find some polonium for President Maduro.
I agree with you. There have been corruption in Venezuela since even before Chavez came to power. The corruption has gone in the past 15 years above and beyond anything you could have possibly imagined. I mean, they are cynical at this point. The way they steal money and nothing, it's investigated. And, even if you think about it, the past 10 years, 15 years, Venezuela reached an amount of money the oil has never been this high, the price of $145 a barrel throughout the history in the past 200 years. And that happened during Chavez regime. And it was squandered. I mean, look, they stole in the 90s, they stole in the 70s. The oil never reached $10 a barrel, $15 a barrel. I mean, you cannot compare the amount of money that has reached Venezuela in the past 10 years with the last 100 years. It's whatever Venezuela income was 100 years ago from oil was pennies if you compare to the past 15 years. And I hope that the outcome of all this, if the opposition gets control of the country, that they learn from what failed in the prior to Chavez and what failed during Chavez and Maduro, and from there they have to learn, because if we don't take anything from that history, then it's going to repeat itself.
Okay. Well, on that somber note, I want to thank you so much for being our guest. I know it can be dangerous being an activist, so we appreciate you coming on board here to give us the scoop. And on behalf of all New Yorkers, thank you very much, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure.